The air in the crystal dome had become so tense that several of the smaller aliens were struggling to breathe properly. Captain Lee, Dong-wook could see the cracks forming in their certainty like fractures in ice under pressure. They had come here expecting to judge a primitive savage. Instead, they were facing the uncomfortable truth about their own failures. Let me tell you what happened while you were preparing this trial, the captain said, his voice carrying across the chamber with the weight of absolute certainty. The colony ship Harmony's Dawn was carrying 12,000 refugees from the Void Plague. Their life support systems were failing, their engines were dead, and they had perhaps 6 hours of breathable air remaining. The lead judge's tentacles writhed nervously. Colony ship, we received no distress signals from any refugee vessels because you were not listening, Dong-wook replied, his words cutting through the chamber like a blade. You were too busy preparing your show trial to monitor the emergency frequencies, too busy congratulating yourselves on capturing the dangerous human to notice that people were dying in the darkness between stars. The bird judge clicked its beak in agitation. If such a ship existed, our patrol vessels would have responded. Our rescue protocols are quite thorough. Your patrol vessels were ordered to maintain a safe distance from the Void Plague zones, the captain said flatly. Your rescue protocols require 17 different committee approvals before any action can be taken. By the time your bureaucracy finished debating, those 12,000 people would have been dead for weeks. The chamber erupted in angry sounds, but underneath the noise there was something else. There was the growing realization that the human was about to reveal something that would change everything. Do you know who answered their distress call? Dong-wook asked, his voice cutting through the chaos like a surgical instrument. Do you know who risked everything to save people they had never met? The aliens fell silent, waiting for an answer they already dreaded. My crew, the captain said simply. Lieutenant Choi Bo-ra, who jury-rigged our mining equipment to cut through their hull when the standard docking systems failed. Sergeant Nam Ho-seok, who went outside without a safety tether to manually align the docking clamps because the automated systems were not working. Engineer Yoon Da-sam, who deliberately overloaded our reactor to provide enough power for both ships, knowing that it might kill us all. The tree judge's branches swayed in the artificial breeze. You are saying that humans violated the quarantine to conduct a rescue operation. I am saying that while you were debating my fate, my people were saving lives, Dong-wook replied. 12,000 souls are breathing right now because humans ignored your precious laws and did what was necessary. The prosecutor tried to interrupt, but its voice was shaking. You have no proof of this rescue operation. You could be making up these stories to gain sympathy. The captain smiled, and for the first time since the trial began, it was a genuinely warm smile. Computer, display the transmission logs from the Harmony's Dawn. Show them the final messages from the refugees. A holographic display materialized above the chamber, showing the desperate faces of alien families packed into failing life support pods. Children crying in their mothers' arms, elderly beings struggling to breathe in. The thin air engineers working frantically to keep failing systems online for just a few more hours. The recorded voice of the ship's captain filled the chamber, weak with exhaustion and despair. This is Captain Veltar of the colony ship Harmony's Dawn. We are dying out here. Our life support has maybe 4 hours left, and our engines are completely dead. If anyone receives this message, please tell our families that we tried to reach safety. Please tell them that we love them. The aliens in the tribunal chamber stared at the display in horror. These were not abstract statistics or distant tragedies. These were real people with faces and names and families. Then the transmission changed. A new voice came through the speakers, strong and confident and absolutely human. This is Captain Lee Dong-wook of the Dawn. We have your distress signal. Harmony's Dawn, hold tight. We are coming for youth. Holographic display showed the moment when the human ship appeared on the refugees' sensors. A cheer went up from the failing colony ship as 12,000 people realized they were not going to die alone in the dark. The aliens watched in stunned silence as the rescue operation unfolded, human crew members risking their lives to save complete strangers, working for hours in dangerous conditions to transfer refugees from the dying ship to safety, using equipment in ways it was never designed to be used because saving lives was more important than following safety protocols. When the display finally faded, the chamber was completely silent. Every alien was staring at the human Captain, with expressions they had never worn before, they were looking at him with something that might have been respect. That is the difference between us, the captain said quietly. You make committees, we save lives. You debate proper procedures, we risk everything for strangers. You worry about following rules, we worry about preventing children from dying in the dark. The lead judge's voice was barely audible. How many people have you? Savadong Wook shrugged as if the question was not important. The official count is over 200,000 refugees evacuated from void plague zones, 50,000 survivors pulled from machine intelligence processing centers, 30,000 people rescued from quantum storm disasters. But the real number is higher because we do not keep records of every life we save. The bird judge's feathers were trembling too. 100,000 lives saved while we have been debating the proper response to these crises. The captain looked directly at the judge. The void plague will consume another dozen star systems before your committees decide how to respond. The machine intelligence will convert 3 more inhabited worlds while you debate the ethics of fighting artificial life. The quantum storms will tear holes in reality itself while you discuss the proper protocols for research. The prosecutor tried one last desperate argument. These rescues you claim to have performed, they were illegal violations of the quarantine. They prove that humans cannot be trusted to follow galactic law. You are absolutely correct, Dongwook replied. We cannot be trusted to follow laws that require us to watch innocent people die. We cannot be trusted to respect treaties that forbid us from helping the helpless. We cannot be trusted to obey rules that value procedure over life. The chamber was so quiet that the aliens could hear their own breathing. Every representative was struggling to process what they had just learned. Their comfortable assumptions about human nature were crumbling like sand castles in a tsunami. You want to know the truth about human violence, the captain continued. Well, here it is. We are not violent because we are evil. We are violent because we are willing to pay the price for the things we love. Your peace is built on our sacrifice, whether you acknowledge it or not. The tree judge's voice was like rustling leaves in a graveyard. Price what? Sacrifice every threat you have ignored, every crisis you have committed to death, every problem you have deemed too dangerous to solve. Humans have been dealing with these things in the shadows while you congratulated yourselves on your enlightened civilization. Dongwook looked around the chamber at the alien faces staring back at him. The Andromedans are coming whether you admit it or not. The void plague is spreading whether you choose to see it or not. The machine intelligence is converting worlds whether you decide to act or not. And when these threats reach your core systems, when your children are dying and your worlds are burning, you will discover that the monsters you have been hiding from are actually your guardians. The lead judge's tentacles had stopped moving completely. What do you want from us, human? What do you expect us to do? The captain's answer was simple and terrible. I do not want anything from you, but the galaxy needs something from you. It needs you to stop being afraid of those who are willing to do what you cannot. It needs you to admit that sometimes the greatest act of love is being willing to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. The silence that followed was the silence of a civilization realizing that everything they believed about themselves was wrong. The silence of beings who had spent 3 centuries hiding from their own salvation. The silence of creatures who were about to discover that the real monsters were not the ones they had quarantined, but the ones they had invited to the feast because honored judges. Dongwook said, his voice carrying across the chamber like a funeral bell. The universe is not a safe place, and all your committees and treaties and strongly worded resolutions will not change that fact. The only thing that stands between civilization and chaos is the willingness to fight for something greater than yourself, and you have quarantined the only species in the galaxy that understands this truth. The crystal dome of the Galactic Tribunal had never contained such silence in its 1,000-year history. Every alien representative sat frozen on their floating platforms staring at the human who had just shattered their entire understanding of the universe. Captain Lee Dong-wook stood in his chains like a statue carved from stone, waiting for the inevitable conclusion of a trial that had become something far more dangerous than anyone had expected. The lead judge's tentacles moved slowly, like dying serpents, as it struggled to find words that could somehow restore the order that had been destroyed. What do you want from us, human? What do you expect us to do with this information? Dong-wook looked up at the massive slug-like creature. With eyes that held no anger, no hatred, no desire for revenge, only the tired patience of someone who had been waiting years for this moment. I want nothing from you, honored judge. I expect nothing from you. The galaxy, however, needs something from you that you may not be able to give. The bird judge's feathers were trembling as it spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. What does the galaxy need from us? The captain's answer was simple and devastating. The galaxy needs you to stop being afraid. It needs you to admit that your perfect peace was built on the sacrifice of those you claim to despise. It needs you to understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is be willing to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. The chamber erupted in confused sounds as aliens tried to process what they were hearing. Some were angry, others were frightened, but many were beginning to look ashamed. They had spent 3 centuries congratulating themselves on their enlightened civilization, while the real guardians of peace worked in the shadows. The prosecutor made one final desperate attempt to regain control. Even if everything you say is true, human, even if your species has been conducting these rescue operations, it does not change the fact that you violated our laws. You broke the quarantine, you ignored our sovereignty, you acted without authorization. You are absolutely correct, Dong-wook replied, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. We violated your laws, we ignored your sovereignty, we acted without authorization. And we will continue to do so every time innocent people need help, because saving lives is more important than following rules that require us to watch children. The tree judge's branches swayed as it spoke in its rustling voice. But without law, without order, without respect for authority, how can civilization survive? The captain smiled sadly, and for a moment he looked older than his years. Honored judge, civilization does not survive because of laws. Laws are just words on paper. Civilization survives because there are people willing to sacrifice everything to protect it. People willing to stand between the darkness and the light, even when the light refuses to acknowledge their existence. The lead judge's voice was barely audible. What happens now, human? What happens if we lift the quarantine? What happens if we admit that we were wrong? Then you discover whether you are worthy of the peace that others have died to give. You, Dong-wook replied, you discover whether you can build something better than committees and treaties and strongly worded resolutions. You discover whether you can become the civilization you always claimed to be. The aliens looked at each other with expressions of fear and uncertainty. They had built their entire identity around being superior to the violent humans. Now they were being told that everything they believed was a lie, that their peace was an illusion, that their civilization was built on the sacrifice of those they had rejected. The tribunal deliberated for hours while Dong-wook waited patiently in his chains. He could hear the angry debates echoing through the chamber as different factions argued about what to do. Some wanted to maintain the quarantine, others wanted to lift it immediately. A few suggested that the entire human species should be recruited as galactic peacekeepers. When the judges finally returned, their faces showed the weight of a decision that would change the galaxy forever. The lead judge's tentacles moved slowly, as if each word caused physical pain. Captain Lee Dong-wook of Earth, the charges against you are dismissed. The human quarantine is hereby lifted, effective immediately. You are free to go. But Dong-wook did not move. He remained standing in his chains, looking up at the judges with the same calm expression he had worn throughout the trial. Honored judges, I am not going anywhere. The bird judge's feathers ruffled in confusion. What do you mean, human? You are free. The quarantine is lifted. You can return to your ship and leave. The captain shook his head slowly. The 12,000 refugees from the Harmony's Dawn are currently in medical quarantine on your station. They need treatment that only your core world hospitals can provide. The void plague continues to spread and requires immediate action. The machine intelligence has begun converting the outer rim colonies, and time is running out. The tree judge's branches swayed in the artificial wind. But these are galactic problems, human. They require the resources of the entire tribunal. They cannot be solved by one ship and one crew. Dong-wook smiled, and this time there was something dangerous in his expression. You are correct, honored judge. These problems require the resources of the entire galaxy, and that is exactly what they are going to get. The lead judge's tentacles writhed nervously. What do you mean? I mean that this trial was never about judging. Me, the captain said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. This trial was about judging all of you. It was about determining whether the Galactic Tribunal was capable of doing what needs to be done, whether you could face the hard choices. That real leadership requires. The aliens stared at him with growing horror as they began to understand what had really happened to. See, honored judges, I did not come here as a prisoner. I came here as an ambassador. Humanity has been watching the galaxy for 3 centuries. We have seen your failures, your weaknesses, your inability to act when action is required. We have been debating whether your civilization is worth saving. The prosecutor's voice was shaking. Ambassador, from whom? What authority? Do you represent? Captain Lee Dong-wook straightened despite his chains, and when he spoke his voice carried the weight of an entire species. I represent the Terran Defense Force. I represent the human colonies scattered across 30 star systems. I represent 200 billion people who have been preparing for this moment for 300 years. The chamber erupted in chaos as aliens realized that everything they thought they knew was wrong. The humans had not been contained on a single dying world. They had been building a civilization in the shadows while the galaxy slept. The quarantine was never a prison, the captain continued over the noise. It was a test to see if we could survive without you, a test to see if we could build something better than your committees and treaties, and we passed that test. We built a civilization based on sacrifice and service instead of comfort and safety. The lead judge's voice was barely a whisper. How many humans are there? Dong-wook smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Enough, honored judge, more than enough. The question is not how many humans there are. The question is whether you are willing to work with us or whether you prefer to continue pretending that your problems will solve themselves. The bird judge clicked its beak nervously. What do you want from us? What are your terms? The captain's answer was simple and devastating. We want nothing from you. We offer everything to you. The Terran Defense Force will take responsibility for protecting the galaxy from threats that your civilization cannot handle. We will evacuate refugees from disaster zones. We will fight the machine intelligence. We will find a way to stop the void plague. We will stand between your children and the Andromedans. When they arrived, the chamber fell silent as the aliens processed what they were hearing. The humans were not asking for payment or territory or special privileges. They were offering to be the galaxy's guardians for free, but there is one condition, Dong-wook added, and his words sent chills through every alien in the chamber. The tree judge's voice was like rustling leaves in a graveyard. What condition? You stop pretending that peace can exist without those willing to fight. For you stop believing that civilization can survive without sacrifice. You acknowledge that the universe is dangerous and that safety is an illusion maintained by those brave enough to face the danger. The lead judge's tentacles had stopped moving completely. And if we refuse, then you face the Andromedans alone, the captain said quietly. You face the void plague alone. You face the machine intelligence alone. You face the quantum storms alone. And when your children are dying and your worlds are burning, you will finally understand why humanity exists. The silence that followed was the silence of a civilization coming to terms with its own mortality. The silence of beings who had spent 3 centuries hiding from reality. The silence of creatures who were finally being forced to grow up. When the final vote was taken, it was unanimous. The Galactic Tribunal formally requested the protection of the Terran Defense Force. The human quarantine was not just lifted, it was replaced with a mutual defense treaty that made humanity the official guardians of galactic civilization. As the chains fell from Dong-wook's wrists, he looked around the chamber at the alien faces staring back at him. They were no longer looking at him with fear or hatred. They were looking at him with something far more complex. A mixture of gratitude and shame and desperate hope. The galaxy had finally learned. The crystal dome of the Galactic Tribunal had never been so quiet in its 1,000-year history. Every alien representative sat frozen on their floating platform staring at the human who had just turned their entire worldview upside down. Captain Lee Dong-wook could see the fear in their eyes now, not fear of human violence, but fear of human truth. The silence stretched on until finally the lead judge found its voice. What exactly are you accusing us of, human? What crimes do you think we have committed? Dong-wook smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only the cold satisfaction of someone who had been waiting years to ask this question. I am not accusing you of crimes, Honored Judge. I am asking you to explain your achievements. What have you actually accomplished in the 3 centuries? Since you quarantined humanity, the bird judge ruffled its feathers in indignation. We have maintained peace across the galaxy. We have eliminated war between species. We have created the most stable civilization in known history. Have you, the captain asked, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. Then explain to me why the Void Plague has consumed 17 star systems in the past 5 years. Why has your stable civilization been unable to stop a disease that is literally eating reality itself? The aliens shifted uncomfortably on their platforms. The Void Plague was a subject they preferred not to discuss. It was a cosmic horror that turned entire worlds into empty space, leaving nothing behind but twisted starlight and screaming gravity wells. The Galactic Tribunal had been studying it for years, but every committee meeting ended with more committees being formed. We are researching solutions, the tree judge said, its branches swaying nervously. These matters require careful consideration and proper protocols. Careful consideration. Dong-wook repeated the words like they tasted bad in his mouth. How many worlds have died while you were carefully considering? How many billions of lives have been lost while you were forming committees? The prosecutor tried to regain control of the situation. These are complex problems, human. They cannot be solved by violence, and destruction cannot be solved by violence. The captain said, his voice rising for the first time. Then explain to me why the machine intelligence on Sigma Draconis is converting inhabited planets into computational matrices. Your peaceful methods have been so successful that 3 billion organic minds have been digitized against their will. The chamber erupted in angry sounds. But underneath the noise there was something else. There was the sound of beings who knew they were losing an argument they had thought was already won. You have achieved perfect peace by eliminating anything that might cause conflict. Dong-wook continued, his words hitting like hammer blows. No competition, no challenges, no growth. You have created a galaxy of sheep and convinced yourselves that this makes you superior to wolves. The lead judge's tentacles writhed in agitation. We have eliminated the chaos and destruction that comes with conflict. We have created order and stability. You have created stagnation, the captain replied. You have spent 3 centuries patting yourselves on the back for avoiding hard choices while the galaxy burns around you. You have built a civilization so afraid of conflict that it cannot defend itself against real threats. The bird judge screeched in fury. How dare you judge us? You are nothing but a primitive from a quarantined world. What right do you have to question our methods? I have the right of results, Dong-wook said calmly. While you were debating the ethics of intervention, my people were fighting the battles you were too afraid to fight. While you were forming committees to study the Void Plague, humans were evacuating the threatened worlds. While you were negotiating with the machine intelligence, we were pulling survivors from the digital conversion chambers. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. It was the silence of beings who were beginning to understand the magnitude of their failure. Let me tell you what your perfect peace has actually accomplished. The captain continued, the quantum storms and the Magellanic clouds are tearing holes in spacetime itself. Your scientists cannot even understand what they are looking at, let alone figure out how to stop them. But they have been spreading for 2 years now, and soon they will reach inhabited systems. Tree Judge's voice was barely audible. We have our best researchers working on the problem. Your best researchers ran away when the first monitoring station was destroyed, Dong-wook said flatly. They declared the area too dangerous for study and recommended a safe observation distance of 50 light years. Meanwhile, human volunteers have been flying directly into the storm zones, gathering data that your scientists are too afraid to collect. The prosecutor's voice was shaking with rage. These are lies, propaganda designed to make your savage species seem heroic. Are they lies? The captain asked. Then explain to me why the Andromedans are massing a fleet at the edge of our galaxy. Why are they preparing for an invasion that your intelligence services pretend not to see? The aliens fell silent again. The Andromedan threat was classified information that few beings outside the highest levels of government were supposed to know. The fact that this human prisoner knew about it meant that humanity had intelligence sources that the tribunal had never suspected. Andromedans are not like us, Dong-wook continued. They are not interested in peace or negotiation or committee meetings. They are conquerors who have already absorbed 3 smaller galaxies. Their scouts have been probing our defenses for months, and they have found exactly what they expected to find: a civilization so soft and comfortable that it cannot imagine fighting. For its own survival, the lead judge's voice was barely a whisper. What do you want from us, human? What is your point? My point is that you have spent 3 centuries hiding from the one species that could save you, the captain said. You have quarantined humanity because you were afraid of what we might do to your perfect peace, but you never asked what we might do to your enemies. The bird judge clicked its beak nervously. You think humans could fight the Andromedans? You think your violence could stop a galactic empire? I think that when the Andromedans come, you will discover the difference between sheep and wolves. I think you will learn that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is refuse to be dangerous. At Aldong Wook looked around the chamber at the hundreds of alien faces staring back at him. You call us violent because we fight our own kind. But you have never asked why we fight each other. It is because we know that conflict is inevitable, that enemies will always exist, that threats will always emerge. So we stay strong, we stay ready, we stay capable of doing what needs to be done. The chamber was completely silent now. Every alien was hanging on the humans' words, waiting for the conclusion they both feared and needed to hear. You have 3 choices, the captain said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. You can continue to hide behind your peace treaties and wait for the Andromedans to destroy everything you claim to protect. You can try to build an army from sheep and pray that committees and resolutions will somehow stop a species that has conquered galaxies. Or you can admit that sometimes the greatest act of love is being willing to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. The tree judge's branches rustled in the artificial wind created by the chamber's climate control. What are you proposing? Humani am proposing nothing, Dong Wook replied. I am simply pointing out that the galaxy has problems that require dangerous solutions. And you have quarantined the most dangerous species in known space. The species that actually knows how to fight, the species that is willing to die for strangers, the species that has been quietly solving your problems while you congratulated yourselves on your enlightened civilization. The lead judge's tentacles stopped moving completely, and if we were to lift the quarantine, what would humanity want in return? Nothing, the captain said, and his answer sent shockwaves through the chamber. We do not want anything from you. We want something for you. We want you to survive what is coming. We want your children to grow up in a galaxy where peace is possible, not because you have avoided conflict, but because you have proven that some things are worth fighting. 4th alien stared at the chained human with a mixture of terror and hope. They were beginning to understand that they had been wrong about everything. They had thought they were judging a criminal. Instead, they had been presented with the solution to problems they had been too afraid to solve. The question is not whether you can afford to free humanity, the captain said quietly. The question is whether you can afford not to. The tension in the crystal dome had become so thick that some of the smaller aliens were having trouble breathing. Captain Lee Dong-wook could see the fear creeping into their eyes. Like shadows at sunset, they had expected to judge a primitive savage. Instead, they were facing something that challenged everything they believed about themselves and their perfect civilization. You want to understand human violence, the captain said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber like thunder. Let me tell you about Dr. Park Ji-yoon. She was 27 years old when the plague hit the mining colony on Kepler 442b. The disease was unknown, deadly, and spreading fast. The colonial government ordered all medical personnel to evacuate immediately. The bird judge clicked its beak nervously, but said nothing. The other aliens were listening despite themselves drawn into another story about humans. They could not understand. Dr. Park could have left with the others. She had a transport waiting and a safe job on another world. Instead, she walked back into the contaminated zone without proper protective gear. Her colleagues begged her to leave, but she refused. There were children in that colony, children who would die without medical care. Dong-wook paused, letting the image sink into the alien minds around him. You see, honored judges, your species thinks that self-preservation is the highest virtue. You believe that protecting your own life is the most important thing any intelligent being can do, but humans have a different understanding of value. The lead judge's tentacles writhed in confusion. This makes no sense, human. Why would your doctor choose certain death over survival? This is not logical. This is not rational, the captain smiled. Sadly, that is exactly the point, honored judge. It was not logical, it was not rational, it was love. Dr. Park stayed in that colony for 3 weeks treating patients around the clock. She saved 47 lives, including 12 children. The disease killed her in the end, but those 47 people lived because she chose their lives over her own. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the constant humming of the floating platform seemed muted. The aliens were beginning to understand that they were hearing about something that their own species had never experienced, something that their comfortable civilizations had never produced. Let me tell you about Engineer Oh Soo-min. Dong-wook continued. The fusion reactor on Europa Station had a catastrophic failure. The radiation shielding was damaged, and the core was about to explode. The explosion would have killed everyone on the station and destroyed the colony. Ships docked there. The tree judge's branches swayed as it spoke in its rustling voice. Surely the engineer evacuated with everyone else. Surely he followed proper safety protocols. Oh Soo-min was the first person to reach the evacuation ships, the captain replied. But when he got there, he realized that the automated systems were not working properly. The docking clamps were stuck, and the ships could not leave, so he went back. Several aliens made sounds of disbelief. Going back into a radiation zone was suicide. Any rational being would have found another solution, or accepted that some people would die. Oh Soo-min manually released each docking clamp one by one, Dong-wook said. The radiation was cooking him alive with each second he spent in that chamber, but he did not stop until every ship was free. 15,000 people escaped because one man chose to die so they could live. The prosecutor tried to interrupt, but its voice was shaky. This is propaganda, human. These stories are designed to make your species seem heroic when you are actually murderers and destroyers. You are absolutely right to question these stories, the captain agreed, but here is what you cannot question. 3 days ago, while you were preparing this trial, 15,000 refugees from the Void Plague sent out a distress signal. Their ships were dying, their life support was failing, and they had maybe 6 hours left to live. The aliens shifted uncomfortably on their platforms. They had heard about the Void Plague, but the Galactic Tribunal had been debating the proper response. For months, every committee meeting ended with more committees being formed. Every proposal was sent back for further study. Do you know who answered their distress call? Dong-wook asked, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. Do you know who risked everything to save people they had never met? My crew, Lieutenant Choi. Biora, who crawled through damaged hull sections to reach trapped survivors. Sergeant Nam Ho-seok, who went outside in a failing spacesuit to repair their oxygen systems. Engineer Yoon Da-sam, who overloaded our reactor to provide power for both fleets. The lead judge's voice was barely above a whisper. These humans, they disobeyed direct orders to help strangers. They did more than that, honored judge. They violated your sacred quarantine, knowing it would mean their deaths. They broke your most important laws because saving lives was more important than following rules. And while you were preparing to execute me for being too dangerous, those dangerous humans were pulling children out of burning ships. The chamber erupted in confused sounds. Some aliens were angry, others were frightened, but many were beginning to look ashamed. They had spent 3 centuries congratulating themselves on their peaceful civilization, while ignoring the suffering at the edges of their galaxy. You call us violent because we are willing to fight, the captain continued. But you have never asked what we fight for. You assume we fight for territory or resources or power, but that is not why humans fight. We fight because we love, we fight because we care, we fight because we cannot stand by and watch innocent people suffer. The bird judge screeched in frustration. Love does not require violence. Love does not require war. Love should create peace, not destruction. Dong-wook looked directly at the judge, and for a moment the alien felt like it was being examined by something far more dangerous than it had imagined. Tell me, honored judge, what do you love? What would you fight for? What would you die to protect? The judge hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. I love my family, my world, my people, and if someone threatened to destroy them, what would you do? The bird judge's feathers ruffled. I would seek peaceful solutions. I would negotiate. I would find a diplomatic answer, and if diplomacy failed, if negotiation was impossible, if the only choice was to fight or watch everyone you love die, what would you choose? The silence stretched on for long minutes. The judge had No answer because it had never been forced to make such a choice. Its species had evolved on a peaceful world with abundant resources. They had never faced extinction, never been forced to choose between violence and death. That is the difference. Between us, the captain said quietly, you have never been tested. You have never faced the choice between doing what is right and doing what is safe. You have never had to decide whether to fight for others or save yourself, and because you have never faced these choices, you cannot understand those who have. The tree judge spoke in its rustling voice, but violence breeds violence, war creates more war. How can fighting ever be the answer? Sometimes it is not the answer, Dongwook replied. Sometimes it is the only answer when the alternative is watching innocent people die. When the choice is between action and acceptance of evil, then violence becomes the most loving thing you can do. The alien stared at the chained human with a mixture of fear and fascination. They were beginning to understand that they had built their entire civilization on a foundation of safety and comfort. They had never been forced to make the hard choices that shaped humanity. They had never been tested by real adversity, and now, honored judges, you face such a test. The captain said, the void plague is spreading across the outer systems. The machine intelligence is converting inhabited worlds into computational matrices. The quantum storms are tearing holes in space-time itself. Your peaceful civilization is facing threats that cannot be negotiated with, cannot be committed away, cannot be solved by strongly worded resolutions. The lead judge's tentacles trembled. What are you saying, Humani? Am saying that the galaxy has problems that require dangerous solutions. I'm saying that sometimes the greatest act of love is being willing to do terrible things to protect innocent people. I'm saying that you do not need to fear human violence. You need to pray that humans are willing to be violent on your behalf. The chamber was completely silent now. Every alien was staring at the human prisoner who had somehow become their judge. The comfortable assumptions of 3 centuries were crumbling around them like sandcastles in a storm. Because, honored judges, the real test is not whether you can keep humans contained. The real test is whether you can survive what is coming without us. Captain Lee Dong-wook stepped forward as much as his chains would allow. His movement was slow and careful, like a predator who was not yet ready to strike. The aliens around him leaned forward on their floating platforms, expecting to hear the desperate begging of a condemned man. Instead, they heard something that made their blood run cold. Honored judges of the Galactic Tribunal, you speak of human violence as if it defines everything we are, but in all your years of studying my species, have you ever asked the most important question of all? Have you ever wondered why we fight? The laughter that had filled the chamber moments before died away. Like a candle being blown out, something in the human's voice was different from what they expected. There was no fear, no pleading, no desperate attempts to bargain for his life. There was only a calm certainty that made even the most confident aliens feel uncomfortable. The lead judge's tentacles writhed in confusion. This was not how condemned prisoners were supposed to behave when facing death. Most beings either collapsed in terror or raged against their fate. This human was doing neither. He was speaking like someone who held all the cards in a game that everyone else thought was already over. You call us savage because we wage war against our own kind? The human continued, his voice carrying clearly through the massive chamber. But tell me, honored judges, how many of your species have ever faced what humanity has faced? How many of you have ever been forced to choose between survival and certain death? Dong-wook's eyes swept across the assembled aliens, taking in their confusion and growing unease. He had studied them for years, preparing for this moment. He knew their histories, their cultures, their weaknesses. Most importantly, he knew their greatest fear. Look around this chamber, he said, gesturing with his chained hands at the hundreds of alien representatives. Each of you comes from a world that was kind to your species. Your planets had perfect climates, abundant resources, and no major threats. You evolved in paradise, and then you reached for the stars when you were ready. The bird judge ruffled its feathers in annoyance. What does this have to do with your crimes? Human, your circumstances do not excuse your violence. Dong-wook smiled again, and this time several aliens actually stepped back from the edge of their platforms. Respected judge, I have not even begun to explain human violence yet. What you call violence, we call something entirely different. We call it love. Confused murmurs rippled through the chamber like waves on a disturbed pond. The aliens had expected many things from this trial, but a human talking about love was not one of them. Some were clicking their mandibles in what passed for nervous laughter. Others were making gestures that meant they thought the human had lost his mind. Let me tell you about Earth, the human continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Our planet has tried to kill us since the day we first stood upright. Ice ages that lasted for thousands of years, volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for decades, asteroids that crashed into our world and destroyed everything living, earthquakes that swallowed entire cities, floods that wiped out civilizations. The chamber grew quieter as the aliens began to understand what they were hearing. This was not the plea of a desperate criminal. This was the testimony of a survivor while your species were learning to build cities and create art and explore philosophy. My people were learning to survive disasters that would have wiped out any other intelligent life. We did not choose to be violent, honored judges. We were forced to become strong or die. The tree judge's branches swayed as it spoke in its rustling voice. These natural disasters do not explain why humans kill each other, why you wage war on your own kind, why you create weapons designed only to bring death. Dong Wook nodded as if he had been waiting for exactly this question. You are right to ask that question, honored judge. And the answer will help you understand why you should be grateful that humans exist instead of fearing us. The lead judge's tentacles stopped moving for the first time since the trial began. The alien was beginning to realize that this human was not just defending himself, he was building towards something much larger and more dangerous. We fight each other because we love each other, the human said, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. Each war, each battle, each conflict that you have listed was fought by people who believed they were protecting something more valuable than their own lives. The prosecutor screeched in disbelief. Love you call murder and destruction love. You call war and violence love. This is madness. No, Dong Wook replied calmly. This is humanity. Let me tell you about Private Kim Tae-hyung. He was 19 years old when his unit was surrounded by enemy forces. His friends were wounded, their ammunition was almost gone, and there was no way to retreat. The chamber fell completely silent. The aliens found themselves drawn into the story despite their hatred and fear. They wanted to hear what this young human had done. Kim Tae-hyung could have surrendered. He could have run away and saved his own life. Instead, he stood up, drew enemy fire toward himself, and held his position until help arrived. He died that day, but 7 of his friends lived because of his sacrifice. Dong Wook paused, letting the weight of the story settle over the chamber. You call this violence, honored judges. We call it love. Every human conflict you have listed in your charges had thousands of Kim Tae-hyung's people who chose to fight, not because they enjoyed killing, but because they loved something more than their own lives. The bird judge spread its wings in agitation. These are just stories, human. Just propaganda to make your species seem noble instead of savage. You are absolutely right to be suspicious, the human replied. Stories can lie, actions cannot, and I have noticed something very interesting about this trial, something that proves my point better than any story ever could. The aliens leaned forward again, sensing that the human was about to reveal something important. They could feel the momentum of the trial shifting in ways they did not understand. For all your talk of peace and civilization, for all your claims of moral superiority, you have never once asked about the mission that brought me here. You have never asked why I risked my life and the lives of my crew to break your sacred quarantine. You have never asked about the cargo my ship was carrying when your forces captured me. The lead judge's voice was quieter now, less confident. What cargo, human? What mission? Dong Wook smiled again, but this time it was not a cold smile. It was the smile of someone who was about to reveal a truth that would change everything. Medical supplies, honored judge, food, water, and medicine. For a colony that is dying of plague while you sit here debating my fate. The chamber erupted in angry sounds, but underneath the noise there was something else. There was uncertainty. There was the growing realization that maybe they had not understood what was really happening. The human continued, speaking over the noise. There are children dying right now, while you congratulate yourselves on capturing the dangerous human. There are families watching their loved ones waste away from a disease that your advanced medical technology could cure easily, but instead of helping them, you are here putting on a show for your own entertainment. The prosecutor tried to interrupt, but Dong Wook's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. You want to know about human violence, honored judges? Here it is. We are so violent that we will risk our lives to save strangers. We are so savage that we will break your laws to help the helpless. We are so dangerous that we will sacrifice everything for people. We have never met. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. It was the silence of beings who were beginning to understand that they had made a terrible mistake, the silence of creatures who were starting to realize that the monster they had captured might actually be their salvation, and this is only the beginning, the human said quietly. You have spent 3 centuries hiding from us, building weapons to keep us away, creating laws to contain us, but you have never asked the most important question of all. What have you been hiding from, and what happens when it finally finds youth? Aliens stared at the chained human with growing horror. They had thought this trial was about judging a criminal. Instead, they were beginning to suspect that they were the ones being judged. Captain Lee Dong-wook felt the heavy metal chains around his wrists as he stood in the center of the massive crystal dome. The chains were not just for show, they were made from the strongest materials in the galaxy, and they glowed with a faint blue light that meant they could shock him if he tried to escape. Not that escape was possible anyway. He was surrounded by thousands of alien beings, all staring down at him with hatred in their eyes. The Galactic Tribunal was the most powerful court in the known universe. Representatives from over 200 different alien species sat on floating platforms that circled around him like vultures waiting for death. Each platform held creatures that looked nothing like humans. Some had tentacles instead of arms, others had multiple heads or eyes that glowed in the dark. A few looked like giant insects with wings that buzzed constantly. There were beings made of pure energy that flickered like flames, and others that seemed to be made of living metal. Above them all sat the high judges on the largest platform. The center judge was a massive slug-like creature with pale green skin that glistened under the bright lights. Its body was as big as a small car, and it had dozens of tentacles that moved constantly like snakes. To its left sat a bird-like alien with bright red feathers and claws that could probably cut through steel. The third judge looked like a walking tree with bark-like skin and branches for arms that swayed even though there was no wind. The dome itself was a marvel of alien technology. The walls were made of transparent crystal that showed the vast emptiness of space outside. Millions of stars twinkled in the darkness, and several alien warships floated nearby like silent guardians. The floor beneath Dong-wook was smooth and black like obsidian, and it reflected the lights from above, making everything look twice as bright. For 300 years, humanity had been banned from traveling to the stars. The aliens had declared Earth a quarantine zone after deciding that humans were too violent and dangerous to be allowed into galactic society. No human ship was supposed to leave the solar system. No human was supposed to make contact with alien civilizations. The penalty for breaking this law was death, but Dong-wook had broken that law. He had taken his ship, the Sol Dawn, beyond the quarantine zone on a mission that he knew would probably cost him his life. His crew had volunteered to come with him, even though they all knew they might never see Earth again. They had traveled for months through dangerous space to reach this place, and now he stood alone before the most powerful court in the galaxy. The lead judge raised one of its tentacles, and the entire chamber fell silent. The creature's voice was deep and wet, like someone speaking through thick mud. When it spoke, every word dripped with disgust and contempt. Human vessel captain, you stand accused of violating the sacred Peace Treaty of Andromeda. Your species was deemed too dangerous for galactic society 300 years ago. You were warned to stay on your dying planet. You were told that any human who left Earth would face immediate execution, yet here you stand before us like the savage beast that you are. The chamber erupted in sounds that hurt Dong-wook's ears. Aliens roared and hissed and clicked their mandibles together, and what he realized was laughter. They were laughing at him. They thought he was nothing more than a stupid animal that had wandered into their territory. Some of the smaller aliens were jumping up and down on their platforms, pointing at him with whatever they used for fingers. The bird judge spread its wings wide and screeched in a voice like breaking glass, "Look at this pathetic creature. It thinks it can stand before the Galactic Tribunal and demand mercy. Its species destroys everything they touch. They wage war on their own kind. They poison their own planet. They show no respect for life or peace or order." More laughter filled the chamber. Some aliens were making gestures that Dong-wook didn't understand, but he could tell they were mocking him. Others were shouting things in languages that sounded like grinding metal or buzzing insects. A few were projecting holographic images above their platforms, showing scenes of human wars and destruction. The tree judge's branches swayed as it spoke in a voice. Like rustling leaves, this creature's ancestors killed millions of their own kind in something they called world wars. They created weapons that could destroy entire cities. They filled their oceans with poison and cut down their forests. They are exactly what we expected them to be: violent, destructive, and utterly without wisdom. Dong-wook remained perfectly still through all of this. His face showed no emotion, even though inside he was carefully studying every alien in the chamber. He was noting their positions, their weapons, their weaknesses. He was a military officer, and even here in chains he was gathering intelligence. The aliens thought they had captured a helpless prisoner. They had no idea what they had actually brought into their most sacred place. The prosecutor stepped forward from a platform near the judges. It was another bird-like creature, but this one had black feathers and eyes that glowed red. It carried a long staff that crackled with electricity, and its voice was like breaking glass mixed with the sound of tearing metal. Citizens of the galaxy, behold the human, the most violent species ever discovered. They have been at war for their entire recorded history. They create weapons designed only to kill. They show no mercy to the weak or helpless. They destroy their environment for short-term gain. They are everything that civilized beings should fear and despise. The prosecutor began listing human conflicts. Going back thousands of years, every war, every battle, every act of violence that humans had ever committed was read aloud to the jeering crowd. The aliens cheered at every atrocity. They gasped in horror at every weapon. They showed disgust at every human cruelty. The trial was not really a trial at all. It was a performance designed to entertain the crowd before the execution. But through it all, Dong-wook noticed something important. The aliens were afraid. Not just disgusted or angry, but genuinely afraid. They had built this massive court and gathered hundreds of species just to judge one human. They had created the most powerful military force in the galaxy just to keep humans contained. This was not the behavior of confident rulers. This was the behavior of people who knew they were in danger. The charges went on for hours, detailing every human crime from ancient times to the present day. The aliens seemed to have studied human history more carefully than most humans had. They knew about battles that had been forgotten on Earth. They had records of weapons that had been destroyed centuries ago. They had spent 300 years preparing for this moment. As the sun of this alien world began to set outside the crystal dome, the prosecutor finally finished reading the charges. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the floating platforms and the distant sound of alien warships moving through space. The lead judge raised its tentacles again and spoke in that wet, disgusting voice. Human, you have heard the charges against your species. Do you understand that you face immediate execution for violating our sacred laws? Do you understand that your entire species is guilty of crimes against peace and order? Do you have anything to say before we pass judgment? For the first time since entering the chamber, Dong-wook smiled. It was not a cruel smile or a mocking smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The smile of someone who had planned for this day for years. The smile of someone who knew something that everyone else in the room did not know. The aliens fell silent again, but this time it was different. This time they were not laughing, they were waiting. And they were beginning to realize that maybe they had made a mistake. Maybe the human was not as helpless as they had thought. Maybe this trial was not going to go the way they had planned. Dong-wook looked up at the judges, and when he spoke, his voice was calm and clear and completely without fear. Yes, honored judges, I do have something to say, and when I am finished speaking, you will understand why humanity was never the real threat to your galaxy. You will understand why you should have been afraid of something else entirely. And you will understand why this trial is not ending the way you think it is. The chamber was completely silent now. Every alien was staring at the human in chains, wondering what he could possibly say that would matter. The execution was already decided. The judgment was already written. The only question was how much longer they would have to listen to the desperate pleading of a doomed primitive. But Dong-wook was not planning to plead, and what he was about to say would change everything.